I watched my sister, Vivian, pour a $200 bottle of Chateau Margaux over my head like I was nothing more than a potted plant she'd forgotten to water. The wine soaked through my hair, down my face, staining the cream silk dress I'd spent 3 months' salary on because God forbid I embarrass the family at her wedding. "You look like dirt, Kendall," she said, loud enough for the entire reception tent to hear. "Actually, you are dirt." The guests, Dallas's elite, oil money and tech billionaires, old ranchers with new Ferraris, they didn't gasp or rush to help. They laughed, polite champagne bubble laughter that cut deeper than any scream. My parents, sitting at the head table in their custom Armani, looked away, actually looked away. That's when I knew I'd spent 28 years loving people who'd never loved me back. The wedding was at my parents' estate in Highland Park, the kind of sprawling property that makes even other rich people uncomfortable. 12 acres of manicured lawn, a main house that could sleep 20, and a garden where Vivian's ceremony had taken place under an arch of white roses that probably cost more than most people's cars. I'd arrived early that morning because Mother, never Mom, always Mother, had texted me that there were family duties to attend to. When I got there, soaking wet from the unexpected October storm, she'd pointed to a folding chair outside the guest tent. "You'll sit there during the ceremony," she said, sipping her morning martini. "We're short on covered seating." I'd stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. So I sat in the rain for 45 minutes while my sister married Garrett Holbrook, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Houston. My dress clung to my skin, my mascara ran in black rivers down my cheeks, and I shivered so hard my teeth chattered. I could see my father through the clear tent walls, laughing with the Holbrooks, probably already calculating how this merger, because that's what it was, a merger, not a marriage, would benefit the family business. Montgomery Holdings was my father's empire, built on oil leases and land development, and Vivian had always been his golden child, the one who looked right in photographs, who said the right things at charity galas, who understood that family meant business and business meant everything. I was the mistake. The second daughter nobody wanted, the one who'd studied sociology instead of business, who'd married a man my parents called that military nobody behind his back, who'd had the audacity to want a life that didn't revolve around their approval. My husband, Cade, was deployed when Vivian got engaged 6 months ago, somewhere overseas he couldn't tell me about, doing something dangerous he couldn't describe. I'd called to tell him about the wedding, and he'd gone quiet on the other end of the line. "Your sister's the one who told everyone you had an abortion in college, right? When you'd actually had a miscarriage?" "Yes," I'd said. "And your parents believed her." "They'd wanted to believe her," I'd corrected. "Kendall, Beebe, why are you even going to this wedding?" "Because they're my family," I'd whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. He'd sighed, that particular sigh that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Family's supposed to be the people who have your back. Think about who actually has yours." But I'd gone anyway because some sick part of me still hoped they'd see me, really see me, and realize they'd been wrong about me all along. So I sat in the rain and watched Vivian float down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than my annual salary as a social worker. I watched my parents beam with pride. I watched Garrett's parents nod approvingly. And when the minister asked if anyone objected, I stayed silent, even though I knew things about Garrett that would have sent guests running for the exits. The wine incident happened during the reception, after I'd changed into the backup dress I'd brought. I'd learned to always have backup everything when it came to family events. I'd been standing near the dessert table, trying to be invisible, when Vivian had appeared with her bridesmaids, all of them already drunk on champagne and entitlement. "Oh, look, she actually stayed," Vivian had said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. I thought for sure you'd run home to cry about how nobody loves you." Her friends had giggled. I'd felt my face flush, but kept my voice steady. "I'm happy for you, Viv. I hope you and Garrett have a beautiful life together." That's when her expression had changed, gone from playful cruelty to something darker. "You don't get to call me Viv anymore, and you don't get to stand here in your cheap dress pretending you belong with us." She'd grabbed the wine bottle from a passing waiter. "Let me help you understand your place." The wine had been cold, shockingly cold, and for a moment I just stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. Then came her words, "You look like dirt, you are dirt," and the laughter, and my parents turned backs. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years under the weight of their contempt, finally snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a branch that's been compressed too far and suddenly whips back with all that stored energy. I walked out of that tent with wine dripping from my hair, past the valets, past the guests smoking cigars on the lawn, and I didn't look back. I called Cade from my car, hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. It went to voicemail. It always went to voicemail when he was working, and I left a message that was half sob, half laugh. "You were right. You were so right. I'm done. I'm so done with all of them." Then I drove back to our modest house in Lakewood, the neighborhood my parents had sniffed at when we'd bought it, and I sat in our living room still wearing my wine-stained dress, and I made a decision. I didn't know what that decision was yet, exactly, but I could feel it forming in my chest like a storm gathering strength. My phone rang an hour later. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Brennan?" a crisp female voice asked. My heart stopped. Unknown numbers when your husband is deployed only mean one thing. "Yes," I managed. "This is Patricia Coleman. I'm calling from Brennan Industries. I apologize for the evening call, but Mr. Brennan asked me to reach out to you directly. He's been trying to reach you, but was unable to get through." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, Brennan Industries? My husband is on his way to Dallas as we speak. His flight lands at 9:45 p.m. He's asked if you could meet him at the Highland Park address where the wedding reception is taking place. He said to tell you specifically that he's handling it and you should trust him. Do those phrases mean something to you?" I sat up straight, wine flaking off my dress onto our couch. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. My husband is deployed overseas with the military. He can't just leave and fly to Dallas." Patricia's laugh was polite, but held an edge of something I couldn't identify. "Mrs. Brennan, your husband hasn't been in the military for 3 years. He's the CEO of Brennan Industries. We're a private equity firm based in New York. I'm his executive assistant." The world tilted. "That's impossible. He's been deployed for 8 months. He calls me when he can. He sends letters." "He's been in New York for 8 months, ma'am, and before you ask, yes, he'll explain everything when he sees you, but he was very insistent that you reach me immediately and that you meet him at that address. He said, and I quote, 'It's time my wife learned who she actually married.'" I ended up back at my parents' estate just before 10, parking behind the line of luxury cars that hadn't thinned much despite the late hour. The reception was still going strong, music and laughter floating across the lawn, and I felt like I was moving through a dream as I walked back toward the tent. I looked like something out of a horror movie, dried wine in my hair, makeup ruined, dress wrinkled, but I didn't care anymore. The weight I'd been carrying, the desperate need for their approval, had evaporated somewhere between Patricia's phone call and this moment. A black Range Rover with New York plates pulled up just as I reached the tent entrance, and I watched a man climb out who looked exactly like my husband and nothing like him at all. Cade was wearing a suit that probably cost $10,000, Tom Ford or something equivalent, and he moved with a confidence I'd never seen in him before. He'd always been handsome, 6'2", broad shoulders, the kind of face that made people trust him, but this version of him commanded attention in a way that made people step back instinctively. "Hey, baby," he said when he reached me, pulling me into his arms like the last 8 months hadn't been a lie. "I'm so sorry you had to wait, but I promise it's going to be worth it." I pushed back from him. Who are you? And don't tell me you're the man I married, because that man was a sergeant in the army who deployed to Afghanistan. His smile was sad. That man was who I needed to be when I met you. This is who I actually am. Cade Brennan, CEO of Brennan Industries. We acquire struggling companies, restructure them, and either turn them profitable or strip them for parts. I'm very good at it. I am worth about $4.3 billion, give or take whatever the market did today. The number was so absurd I almost laughed. Why would you lie to me? Why would you pretend to be someone else for 5 years? He touched my wine-stained hair gently. Because when I met you at that veterans benefit in Austin, you were the first person in 10 years who looked at me and didn't see dollar signs. You saw someone who needed help setting up the donation tables, and you handed me a stack of tablecloths and told me to make myself useful. Do you remember? I did remember. I'd been volunteering, and this handsome guy had been standing around looking lost, and I'd put him to work. You said you were in the military. I was, for 6 years, right out of college. Everything I told you about my service was true. I just left out the part where I came from money and went back to the family business when I got out. When we started dating, you were so different from everyone in my world, genuine, kind, completely unimpressed with wealth, and I thought if you knew the truth, you'd see me differently. So you lied for 5 years? Through dating, through our engagement, through our entire marriage? My voice was flat. He winced. I kept meaning to tell you, but then I saw how your family treated you, how they measured everyone by their bank account and their connections, and I knew if I told you the truth, you'd think I was just like them. So I stayed deployed. You were never deployed. I was in New York, running my company and building up leverage for this exact moment. He gestured toward the tent entrance. Because I knew eventually your family would push you too far, and when they did, I wanted to be in a position to push back. I stared at him. What does that mean? His expression hardened. It means I've spent the last 8 months buying up every company, every property, every asset your father depends on. Montgomery Holdings is built on partnerships and agreements with about 30 different entities. As of this afternoon, I controlled 27 of them. One phone call from me, and your father's empire collapses like a house of cards. The tent flap opened and Garrett Fulbrook stepped out, loosening his tie, probably looking for a quiet place to take a business call, because men like him never stopped working. He saw us, and his eyes widened slightly at my appearance, but then his gaze shifted to Cade, and something like recognition flickered across his face. Cade Brennan? What the hell are you doing here? Cade's smile was predatory.
Hello, Garrett. Beautiful wedding. Shame about your job. Garrett went pale. What are you talking about? Holbrook Real Estate Group, your family's company. I acquired the controlling interest yesterday. The board voted this morning to remove your father as CEO, effective immediately. You were CC'd on the email, but I'm guessing you haven't checked your inbox today, what with getting married and all. Cade's tone was conversational. Pleasant, even. Your father will remain as a consultant, but he'll have no actual power. And you're fired. Security will clear out your office Monday morning. Garrett's face went from pale to red. You can't do that. That company has been in my family for 3 generations. And now it's mine. Well, my company's. We're going to restructure, eliminate the nepotism problem you people have, and actually make it profitable. You're welcome to apply for a job once you have some actual qualifications beyond your last name. Garrett took a step forward, and Cade didn't move, just stood there with that same pleasant expression. You have no idea who you're messing with. My family. Your family is about to learn what happens when you build an empire on relationships instead of results. Those relationships? I own them now. Cade turned to me. Ready to go inside? I think it's time we joined the party. We walked into that reception tent together, and the music seemed to stutter to a stop, conversations dying as people registered my destroyed appearance in Cade's presence. My parents stood up from the head table, my father's face already reddening with anger. Kendall, what is the meaning of this? We told you to leave. You told her to sit in the rain like a dog. Cade interrupted, his voice carrying across the tent with the kind of authority that made people listen. You watched your daughter get humiliated and you did nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. You participated. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. And who exactly are you to speak to us that way in our own home? Cade smiled. I'm Cade Brennan, Kendall's husband, the one you've been calling that military nobody for 5 years. I'm also the man who now controls the majority of your husband's business partnerships. Nice to finally meet you properly. The tent had gone completely silent now. My father's face was doing something complicated, cycling through confusion and anger and then something that might have been fear. That's impossible. I've never even heard of Brennan Industries, private equity. We're very good at staying under the radar until we're ready to make a move. And Mr. Montgomery, we're ready. Cade pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed my father the screen. These are the companies I now control. Notice anything familiar? I watched my father's face go gray. This is a joke, some kind of con. Call your lawyers, call your partners, make whatever calls you need to make. I'll wait. Cade pocketed his phone and put his arm around my waist. But while you're processing that, let me be very clear about something. You have 48 hours to issue a public apology to my wife, not some half-hearted statement, a real apology, acknowledging years of emotional abuse and manipulation. You'll also be establishing a trust fund in her name, equal to what you've given Vivian. And Vivian, he looked at my sister, who'd gone very still, you're going to therapy, and you're going to work on understanding why you feel the need to destroy the one person who's only ever tried to love you. Vivian found her voice first, shrill and desperate. Daddy, do something. He can't just come in here and threaten us. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating facts. Your father built his business on handshake deals and family connections. I built mine on contracts and leverage. Guess which one is more powerful? He looked around the tent at all the wealthy, powerful people who'd laughed at me hours earlier. By the way, the Holbrook family no longer controls their real estate company. I do. The Templeton oil leases your father depends on, I bought those 6 months ago. The Riverside Development Project that's supposed to break ground next month, that requires permits from the city and the city council members you usually donate to. They're all being investigated by the FBI as we speak. Anonymous tip, very detailed. My father's voice was barely a whisper. You're destroying me. No, Cade said. I'm giving you a choice. Treat your daughter like a human being or lose everything. Seems fair to me. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt justified. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd just watched something die. My parents stood there, these people who'd shaped my entire life, and they looked small suddenly, powerless. Vivian was crying, actual tears running down her face, and Garrett had his arm around her, but he looked lost, a man who'd just realized his whole identity was built on sand. The guests were pulling out their phones, probably already calling their lawyers and accountants, trying to figure out what this meant for their own deals and connections. I don't want this, I heard myself say. Everyone turned to look at me. I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted... My voice broke. I just wanted you to love me. Cade's arm tightened around my waist. Kendall. No. I stepped away from him, looking at my parents. I'm not like you, any of you. I don't measure people by their bank accounts or their usefulness, and I'm not going to become the kind of person who uses money as a weapon, even against people who hurt me. I took a shaky breath. But I am done. I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into your idea of who I should be. I'm just done. My mother's face did something strange, a crack appearing in her perfect society mask. Kendall, you don't understand the pressure we've been under, the business, the expectations. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You chose money and status over your daughter. You made that choice every single day for 28 years. And you know what's funny? I would have given you anything. My whole life, all I wanted was for you to see me, to be proud of me for who I actually am, not who you wanted me to be. but you couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. I looked at Vivian. And you could have been my sister, my best friend. Instead, you saw me as competition for scraps of affection from people who don't know how to love anyone. Vivian's tears were coming harder now. You don't know what it was like, being the oldest, having to be perfect all the time. So you made sure I could never be perfect enough. Yeah, I get it. You were hurting, so you hurt me. But you're a grown woman now, Viv. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your choices. The tent was so quiet I could hear the October wind rustling the fabric walls. Cade stood beside me, and I could feel him waiting, letting me have this moment. "Kendall," my father said finally, his voice rough, "what do you want from us?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. What did I want? An apology? Yes, but would it change anything? Would it erase the years of feeling worthless, of measuring myself against an impossible standard, of watching my own parents choose my sister over me again and again? "I want you to be better," I said finally. "Not for me, I'm done waiting for that, but for yourselves. Because this," I gestured around the tent, at the wealth and status they'd sacrificed everything for, "this is hollow. You're hollow. And someday you're going to wake up and realize you traded your children for a business empire that won't hold your hand when you're dying." My mother actually flinched. I turned to Cade. "Can we go home now?" He nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Are you sure? Because I have the power to make them—" "I know, and I love you for wanting to protect me, but I don't need you to destroy them. I just need to leave." We walked out of that tent together, and behind us I heard someone start to cry. I think it was my mother, but I didn't look back to check. Cade helped me into his Range Rover, and we drove away from my parents' estate, away from the life I'd spent so long trying to be part of. "You're not mad at me?" he asked after several minutes of silence. "For lying about who I am?" I looked at him, at this man who'd loved me enough to hide his true identity for years, who'd spent 8 months positioning himself to defend me against my own family. "I'm mad that you felt like you had to lie, but I understand why you did it." I touched his hand on the steering wheel. "Who are you really, Cade Brennan?" He smiled slightly. "I'm the guy who fell in love with a woman who handed him a stack of tablecloths and told him to make himself useful. Everything else is just details." We drove in silence for a while longer, and then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since Patricia's phone call. "What happens now? With my father's business, with all your leverage?" Cade glanced at me. "That's entirely up to you. I can follow through with everything I threatened, or I can walk away. But there's something else you should know. Something I found out during my research. Something about why your parents really treat you the way they do." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" He pulled the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, turned to face me. "Your father isn't your biological father. Your mother had an affair 29 years ago with a man named David Chen. He was a professor at SMU, taught literature. Your father found out when you were 6 months old." The world tilted again, familiar landmarks suddenly strange. "That's impossible. I look like my father." "You look like your mother," Cade corrected gently, "and you have her eyes, her smile. But your height, your hair color, the way you think about the world, that all comes from David Chen. He died 10 years ago, Kendall. Cancer. But before he died, he tried to reach out to you several times. Your parents intercepted every letter, every email." I couldn't breathe. All those years of feeling like I didn't quite fit, of watching my father look at me with something like disappointment in his eyes, of wondering why Vivienne was the golden child and I was the mistake. Suddenly, it all made a horrible kind of sense. He knew I wasn't his and he stayed married to my mother? For the business connections, yes. Your mother's family had political ties he needed. And I think, in his way, he convinced himself he was being noble by raising you. But he could never quite forgive your mother for the affair, and he took it on you. Not consciously, maybe, but consistently. Cade's jaw tightened. "There's more. David Chen left you everything in his will.
A house in Austin, a substantial investment portfolio, his entire personal library. It's been held in trust, waiting for you to claim it. Your parents never told you because once you knew the truth, they'd lose whatever control they still had over you. I stared out the windshield at the Dallas skyline, glittering in the distance like a handful of stars someone had dropped on the ground. Somewhere in this city was my real story, the truth about who I actually was and where I came from. How do you know all this? Cade's expression turned grim. When I realized how badly your family was treating you, I hired investigators, the best ones money can buy. They found everything, the affair, the letters, the will, all of it. I was going to tell you before the wedding, but you seemed so hopeful that things might be different this time, and I didn't want to take that away from you. Part of me wanted to be angry at him for keeping this secret too, but I was too numb, too overwhelmed. I need to see the letters, the ones David tried to send me. They're at our house. I had my people retrieve copies from your parents' safe. He started the car again. But Kendall, there's one more thing, something I discovered yesterday that changes everything. I laughed, slightly hysterical. How could there possibly be more?
Cade's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Your sister knows. Vivian has known for years that you're not her full sister. Your mother told her when Vivian was 16, right after you went away to college. She told her to use it, to always remind you that you were different, that you didn't truly belong. The numbness cracked, rage flooding in to fill the space. She's known for 12 years and she never said anything? She used it as ammunition. Every time she made you feel like an outsider, every time she reminded you that you weren't quite right for the family, she was doing it with full knowledge of why. Cade glanced at me. That's why I went after Garrett's company first. Because Vivian chose to marry a man just like your father, wealthy, connected, emotionally unavailable, and I wanted her to understand what it feels like when the ground shifts beneath your feet. We pulled up to our house in Lakewood, the modest home my parents had mocked, and I sat there in the driveway not moving. Kendall? Cade's voice was soft. Baby, talk to me. I spent my whole life trying to be good enough for people who were never going to accept me, not because I wasn't good enough, but because I reminded them of a secret they wanted to forget. I looked at him. Who am I, Cade? If I'm not a Montgomery, if my whole identity was built on a lie, then who am I? He reached over, took my hand. You're Kendall Chen Brennan. You're a social worker who fights for kids in foster care because you know what it feels like to not belong. You're the woman who volunteers at the Veterans Center every Sunday. You're the person who sees good in people even when they don't deserve it. Your DNA doesn't change any of that. I wanted to believe him, but all I could think about was David Chen, this man I'd never known, who'd tried to reach me and been blocked at every turn. What was he like? From what I could find, kind, brilliant, beloved by his students. He never married, never had other children. I think, Cade's voice caught, I think he spent his whole life loving you from a distance. I started crying then, really crying, for the father I'd never known and the one who'd punished me for existing, and the mother who'd chosen her marriage over her daughter, and the sister who'd weaponized a secret that should have brought us closer together. Cade held me while I sobbed, and I thought about all the moments in my life that suddenly made sense. The way my father would sometimes look at me and leave the room. The way my mother would overcompensate with gifts that never felt like love. The way Vivian would smile when she hurt me, like she was settling a score I didn't know we were keeping. What do we do now? I asked when I could finally speak again. Cade was quiet for a long moment. That depends on what you want. I still have all the leverage I threatened your father with. I can destroy Montgomery Holdings if you want me to. Or I can walk away and we can start fresh, just us. I thought about revenge, about how good it would feel to watch my parents' empire crumble, to see them lose everything the way they'd made me feel like I'd lost everything. But then I thought about David Chen, this man who'd loved me without ever knowing me, and I wondered what he would have wanted for me. "There's a third option," I said slowly. "What's that?" I looked at Cade, at this man who'd built an empire and hidden it from me so I'd love him for himself, who'd positioned himself to fight my battles but let me decide which ones to fight. "You said David left me money. How much?" Cade named a figure that made my breath catch. "And the house?" He pulled up the property listing on his phone, showed me photos of a beautiful craftsman in Austin's Hyde Park neighborhood, all hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves, and the kind of character our Lakewood house couldn't quite manage. "It's been maintained by the trust, ready for you whenever you want it." I looked at those photos, and I could see a different life, one where I wasn't defined by my parents' expectations, or my sister's cruelty, or my own desperate need to belong somewhere I was never meant to fit. "I want to claim my inheritance, all of it, and I want to read David's letters tonight, every single one of them." I took a breath. "And then tomorrow, I want to go back to my parents' house one last time, not for revenge, but to tell them exactly who I am and what they lost when they chose to punish me for their own mistakes." Cade's smile was slow and proud. "That's my girl." We went inside and he handed me a leather portfolio containing copies of 23 letters spanning the last decade of David Chen's life. I stayed up all night reading them, and with each page I discovered the father I should have had. Intellectual, curious, full of love for a daughter he'd never been allowed to know. He'd written about books he thought I'd enjoy, about places in Austin I should visit, about his hope that someday I'd understand why he'd stayed away. "Your mother made me promise," he wrote in one letter from 2015. "She said it would destroy her marriage, ruin your life, confuse you when you needed stability. I believed her. I think that was my greatest mistake." The last letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. His handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. "Kendall, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know that every day of my life I thought about you. You were the best thing I ever did, even if I couldn't be part of your life. I'm leaving you everything I have. It's not much compared to what your family has, but it's yours. Build a life that makes you happy, not one that makes them proud. They don't deserve your goodness." I cried until I had no tears left, and then Cade held me while I slept. The next morning, we drove back to Highland Park one last time. My parents' estate looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less impressive. We found them in the breakfast room, my father reading the business section, my mother picking at a fruit plate. They looked up when we entered, and I saw my father's hand shake slightly as he set down his coffee. "Kendall, Cade, we weren't expecting—" "I know about David Chen," I interrupted. "I know you're not my biological father. I know about the affair, the letters, everything." My mother went white. "Who told you that? That's private family—" "There's no such thing as family with you," I said. "There's only transactions and secrets and leverage." I placed the portfolio of letters on the table. "David Chen tried to contact me for 10 years, and you blocked every attempt. He left me his estate, and you never told me. You let me spend my whole life thinking I was broken, that I was the problem, when really you were just punishing me for existing." My father stood up. "Now you listen here. I raised you. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," I said quietly. "Nothing that mattered. And you took everything. My self-worth, my relationship with my sister, my chance to know my real father before he died." I looked at my mother. "You had an affair, and instead of owning it, dealing with it, working through it like adults, you made it my burden to carry. A child. You made a child responsible for your mistakes." She was crying now, silent tears running down her perfectly made-up face. "You don't understand what it was like, the shame, the fear that people would find out. I understand that you chose your reputation over your daughter. That's all I need to understand. I pulled out the papers Cade's lawyers had prepared. I'm changing my name. Legally, officially. I'm Kendall Chen now. Montgomery isn't my name, and it never was. My father's face went red. You ungrateful... Cade stepped forward. Careful. Whatever you say next, you won't be able to take back. His voice was ice. And you should know that I've decided to follow through with my acquisition plans. By the end of the month, you'll no longer control Montgomery Holdings. I'm restructuring everything, removing family members from positions they're not qualified for, actually running it like a business instead of a personal piggy bank. My mother gasped. You can't do that. That company is our legacy. It's a business, I corrected, and you treated it like it was more important than people, more important than me. I looked at both of them. I'm taking David's inheritance, and I'm moving to Austin. I'm going to start over, build a life that actually matters, surround myself with people who know how to love without conditions. And you, I gestured between them, are going to have to live with the choices you made, with the daughter you lost because you couldn't see past your own pride and fear. Vivian appeared in the doorway, still in her bathrobe, looking wrecked. Kendall, wait, can we talk? I looked at her, this woman who'd been my tormentor for so many years. You knew about David, about why they treated me differently. And you used it against me. She had the grace to look ashamed. I was 16 and angry and stupid, and then so much time passed and I didn't know how to tell you. You didn't want to tell me, I corrected, because keeping me off balance, keeping me feeling like an outsider, that gave you power, made you feel secure in your position as the favorite. I shook my head. I hope your marriage works out, Viv. I really do. But you should know that Garrett's company is gone, your life is about to get a lot more complicated, and the only person you'll have to blame is yourself. We left them there, 3 people who'd built their lives on secrets and status, and we walked out into the Texas sunshine. I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until it was gone. You okay? Cade asked as we drove away. I thought about that question. Was I okay? My entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies. The people I'd thought were my family had never really wanted me. But I also had David's letters, his love reaching across death. The first thing I did with David Chen's inheritance was establish a scholarship fund at SMU for first-generation college students studying literature. The second thing I did was quit my job at the Dallas Social Services office, not because I was done helping people, but because I was done living in a city that felt like a museum of my own suffering. The house in Austin's Hyde Park neighborhood was everything the photos had promised and more. Walking through David's home for the first time felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd never known existed. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing everything from classical philosophy to contemporary fiction, margins filled with his handwritten notes. In the study, I found a journal where he'd written about me, about watching from a distance as I grew up, about the agony of loving someone he couldn't claim. She has my eyes, he wrote when I was 7. I saw her at the grocery store with her mother, and she was reading the cereal boxes, actually reading them, sounding out the words, and my heart broke because I wanted to tell her to read better things, important things, to show her how words could build worlds. I sat on the floor of his study and cried for the 3rd time that week, mourning a relationship that had existed only in one person's heart. Cade had been patient with me in those early weeks, giving me space to grieve and rage and process everything that had imploded. He'd moved his primary operations to Austin, working from David's home office, while I explored my inheritance and figured out who Kendall Chen actually was. The house had become our sanctuary, a place where we could finally be honest with each other about everything. One evening in November, about 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, I asked him the question that had been nagging at me. Why did you really hide who you were? And don't give me the line about wanting me to love you for yourself. There's more to it, isn't there? He looked up from his laptop, and I saw him calculating how much truth to share. Don't, I warned. No more partial truths. No more protecting me from information you think I can't handle. I'm done being treated like I'm fragile. He closed the laptop. Fair enough. The truth is, I was running from my own family. My father built Brennan Industries from nothing, and it made him ruthless, cold. By the time I was old enough to understand what he was, I hated him, hated what money had done to him, to us. When I joined the military, it was partly about service, but mostly about escape. He paused. After my father died and I took over the company, I promised myself I wouldn't become him. But business is business, and I found myself making the same choices, justifying the same behaviors. When I met you, this woman who'd chosen a career helping people instead of accumulating wealth, who thought I was just some regular guy and treated me like a human being instead of a walking ATM, you were like proof that there was another way to live. I sat down across from him. So you used me as some kind of moral anchor?
No. His voice was firm. I loved you. Love you. But yes, being with you, seeing the world through your eyes, it reminded me of who I wanted to be instead of who I was becoming. And when I saw how your family treated you, I recognized something. They were doing to you what money and power had done to my father, making you feel worthless unless you fit their definition of valuable. He leaned forward. I know I went about it wrong. I know lying to you about who I was, about where I was for 8 months, I know that was a violation of trust. But I also know that if I'd told you the truth 5 years ago, you would have treated me differently. You would have second-guessed every kind thing you said, wondering if I thought you were after my money. And I needed— His voice cracked slightly. I needed someone to love me for who I am, not what I have. Is that selfish? Probably, but it's the truth. I thought about that, about how we'd both been using each other in some way, him as proof that love could exist without transaction, me as proof that I was worthy of love even if my family couldn't see it. Okay, I said finally, but no more secrets. If we're going to make this marriage work, really work, we need to be honest with each other even when it's uncomfortable. Deal, he agreed. Then he pulled out his phone. In that spirit, there's something you should see. Your sister has been trying to reach you. I hadn't spoken to Vivian since walking out of my parents' house. I'd blocked all their numbers, ignored their emails, built a wall between my old life and my new one. What does she want? To apologize, according to the messages she's been sending through my assistant. Apparently, things have gotten complicated for her. He showed me his phone. There were 17 messages from Vivian, each one longer and more desperate than the last. I read through them, watching my sister unravel in real time. Garrett's family had apparently not taken the loss of their company well. His parents blamed Vivian, called her a gold digger who'd brought bad luck. Garrett himself had become distant, spending his days job hunting and his nights drinking. Their honeymoon had been canceled because the money wasn't there anymore. And my parents, rather than supporting her, had withdrawn into their own crisis as Cade systematically dismantled everything my father had built. She says she understands now what she did to you, I read aloud. She says she's been seeing a therapist and working on understanding why she needed to hurt me. I looked at Cade. Do you believe her? He shrugged. Does it matter what I believe? The question is, do you believe her? And more importantly, do you want to? I thought about Vivian. Not the cruel, vindictive person she'd been at her wedding, but the sister I'd loved before everything got twisted and complicated. I remembered being 9 years old and her being 13, and how she'd taught me to braid my hair, how we'd sneak cookies from the kitchen late at night, how we'd been allies once upon a time, before our parents had turned us into competitors. I want to, I admitted, but I don't know if I can trust her, and I don't know if I'm ready to forgive her. Then don't,
Cade said simply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you could hear what she has to say, if you want to. I didn't want to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to protect myself, to maintain the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. But there was this tiny voice in the back of my head, David's voice from one of his letters, saying that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Tell her she can come here, I said finally. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. She gets 1 hour. Cade nodded and sent the message. Then he pulled me into his arms. You don't have to do this, you know. You don't owe her anything. I know, I said against his chest. But maybe I owe it to myself to hear her out, to see if there's anything worth salvaging. Saturday came with the kind of perfect Austin weather that made me understand why David had chosen to live here. Sunny but not too hot, a breeze carrying the scent of cedar and possibility. Vivian arrived exactly on time, driving a Honda Civic that made me do a double take, because my sister had never driven anything that cost less than $60,000 in her life. She looked different, too. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that definitely weren't designer.
"Thank you for seeing me," she said when I opened the door. Her voice was quiet, lacking the confident edge I'd always associated with her. "I wasn't sure you would." I led her to David's study, the room that had become my favorite space in the house. She looked around, taking in the books and the lived-in comfort, and something flickered across her face that might have been envy or might have been sadness. "This is beautiful, much better than that sterile mansion in Highland Park." "It belonged to my father," I said, watching her reaction. "My real father, David Chen. He left it to me." Vivian flinched but didn't look away. "I know. I know now. Mother told me everything last week, after you left. The whole truth, not just the version she fed me when I was 16. She sat down in the chair across from me. "Kendall, I need to start by saying I'm sorry. Not the performative sorry I've probably said 100 times over the years, but actual sorry. I'm sorry for the wine, for the words, for making you sit in the rain. I'm sorry for every cruel thing I've ever done to you. Every time I made you feel small or worthless or less than. You didn't deserve any of it." I waited, letting the words sit between us. "That's a good start," I said finally. "But why, Viv? Why did you hate me so much?" She looked down at her hands. "I didn't hate you. That's the thing that makes it worse. I loved you, and I was so angry at you for making me love you when I was supposed to be the only one, the special one, the daughter who mattered." She took a shaky breath. "When I was 16 and Mother told me you weren't fully Dad's biological daughter, she made it sound like this terrible secret we had to keep, this thing that made you less legitimate. And she said it explained why you were different, why you didn't quite fit. She weaponized it, Kendall. She taught me to weaponize it. And I was 16 and desperate for any advantage, any way to secure my position as the favorite, so I took it and ran with it." "You were 28 at your wedding," I pointed out. "At some point, you became responsible for your own choices." "I know," she said quickly. "I know. And that's what the therapy is helping me understand, that I've been blaming everyone else for my behavior, when really I made a choice every single time I hurt you. I chose cruelty over compassion. I chose winning over having a sister. And I can't take any of it back. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did and I'm horrified by it." I wanted to believe her. Part of me was screaming to believe her, to grab onto this olive branch and rebuild some kind of relationship. But I'd spent too many years being disappointed. "What changed?" I asked. "Why now?" Vivian laughed bitterly. "Everything changed. Garrett's family cut us off financially because they blame me for losing the company. Garrett resents me for it.
He hasn't said it directly, but I can see it in the way he looks at me, like I'm some kind of curse. Mother and Dad are so wrapped up in trying to salvage what's left of Montgomery Holdings that they don't have time for me anymore. I went from being the golden child to being completely alone in the space of 3 weeks. She met my eyes, and in all that isolation, I started thinking about you, about how you lived your whole life in that space, not quite belonging, not quite good enough, always on the outside looking in. And I realized I'd spent years creating that reality for you on purpose, and now I was living it myself, and it was unbearable. There was something raw in her voice that I'd never heard before, something real. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued. I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm genuinely sorry, and I'm working on being better. Not because I think it'll fix us, but because I can't stand who I've been. I sat with that for a long moment, watching my sister, really watching her, maybe for the first time in years. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, but also more human than I'd ever seen her. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said finally. I might never be ready. What you did, what you've done over the years, it damaged me, Viv. It made me question my worth, my place in the world, my right to exist. That's not something that gets fixed with one apology. She nodded, tears starting to fall. I understand. But, I continued, I'm willing to leave the door open. Not wide open, more like cracked. If you're serious about therapy, about doing the work to understand why you hurt me and making sure you don't hurt anyone else that way, then maybe someday we can figure out what a relationship between us looks like. But it won't be what it was. We're not going back to being those little girls sneaking cookies. Too much has happened. I'll take it, Vivian said quietly. Whatever you're willing to give, I'll take it. We sat in silence for a moment, and then she asked, What was he like, your real father? I smiled despite myself. Brilliant, kind. He loved books and ideas, and apparently he loved me, even though he never got to know me. I gestured to the shelves around us. This whole house is like a letter he left for me, showing me who he was and who he hoped I could be. Vivian looked around the room with something like wonder. It's beautiful, and it suits you in a way the Highland Park house never did. She paused. Can I ask you something about Cade? What about him? Is he really worth $4 billion? Despite everything, I laughed. More or less. Why? Because it's funny, she said with a slight smile. You ended up with everything we were supposed to want, the money, the power, the husband who can buy and sell entire companies, and you don't even care about it. You married him when you thought he was nobody, and finding out he's somebody didn't change how you feel about him. She shook her head. Meanwhile, I married Garrett specifically because his family had money and connections, and now that those are gone, I'm realizing I don't even like him very much. We have nothing to talk about when we're not discussing business or social events. That sounds lonely, I said, and I meant it. It is, she admitted. It's so lonely, and I'm starting to understand that's how you felt for most of your life. Lonely, even surrounded by family. Especially surrounded by family. She stood up. I should go. I know you said an hour, and I don't want to overstay. I walked her to the door, and before she left, she turned back. Kendall, thank you for letting me come, and thank you for not gloating about how everything worked out for you. I would have deserved it if you had. After Vivian left, I found Cade in David's office, working on his laptop. How did it go? He asked without looking up. Strange, I said honestly. She seemed genuine. Broken, but genuine. I sat down on the couch. Do you think people can really change? Now he did look up. I think people can choose to change if they want it badly enough. Whether they follow through is another question. He closed his laptop. But here's what I know. Your sister lost everything, and that made her realize what actually mattered.
Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they're willing to do the work. Is that what happened to you? I asked. Did you hit rock bottom? He considered that. In a way, I was becoming my father, rich, successful, and completely empty inside. Meeting you pulled me back from that edge, gave me a reason to be better. He smiled slightly. So maybe we're all just works in progress, trying to be slightly less broken than we were yesterday. Over the next few months, I settled into my new life in Austin. I took a position at a local nonprofit that helped families navigate the foster care system, using both my experience and David's money to make a real difference. Cade split his time between Austin and New York, but even when he was traveling, he called every night, and we talked about everything: his work, my work, our hopes for the future, the ways we were both learning to be more honest with ourselves and each other. Vivian and I texted occasionally, brief exchanges that felt like two strangers learning each other's language. She'd send me updates about her therapy sessions, never asking for sympathy or forgiveness, just sharing her progress. I'd respond with encouragement, but maintained my boundaries. It was much, but it was more than I'd thought possible after the wedding. My parents, on the other hand, remained conspicuously absent from my life. Cade had followed through on his promise to restructure Montgomery Holdings, bringing in actual qualified executives and removing family members who'd been coasting on nepotism. My father had been offered a position as consultant, basically a figurehead role with a modest salary and no real power. From what I heard through Vivian, he'd aged considerably, the loss of control hitting him harder than any financial loss could have. My mother had tried to reach out once, a long email full of justifications and explanations that boiled down to, "We did the best we could." I'd read it once and then deleted it. I wasn't interested in their version of events anymore. In January, about 4 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from my father. Not the man who raised me, but Robert Montgomery, the one who'd spent my entire life punishing me for his wife's affair. "Kendall," it read, "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because your mother tells me you deserve the truth, even if it's ugly." The letter went on to detail his version of events, finding out about the affair when I was 6 months old, his decision to stay married for business reasons, his inability to separate me from his rage at my mother. "Every time I looked at you, I saw my failure," he wrote. "My inability to keep my wife's love, my inadequacy as a husband, and instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I made them your burden. I let you think you were the problem when really I was just a coward who couldn't face his own inadequacy." He described the years of watching me try to earn his approval, knowing he would never give it, hating himself for his cruelty but unable to stop. "You deserved better," the letter concluded. "You deserved a father who could love you for who you were instead of resenting you for what you represented. I can't give you those years back, but I can tell you that your success, your happiness, your ability to walk away from us, it's more than I ever had the courage to do. You're stronger than any Montgomery has ever been, and that's because you're not really a Montgomery at all. You're David Chen's daughter, and he would have been proud of you." I read that letter 3 times, looking for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, the way he might be trying to work his way back into my life. But it seemed genuine, a final admission of guilt from a man who'd spent decades deflecting blame. I didn't respond. I filed it away with David's letters, a contrast between the father I'd had and the father I'd deserved. In March, Vivian called me for the first time since our meeting. "I'm leaving Garrett," she said without preamble. "The marriage was a mistake, and staying in it is making me miserable." "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "I'm broke and unemployed and living with a man who barely speaks to me, so no, I'm not okay," she laughed. "But I'm making a choice for myself, instead of for appearances, and that feels like progress." She paused. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I was wondering, do you think there might be a position at your nonprofit? I have a business degree and I'm good with fundraising and organization. I'll take anything, even an assistant role. I just need to start building something that actually matters. I should have said no immediately. Letting Vivian into my workspace, my sanctuary, was asking for trouble. But I heard myself saying, "Send me your resume. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what we have available." "Thank you," she said, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before, humility. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm trying to be someone who does." 2 weeks later, Vivian started as a fundraising coordinator at the nonprofit, working in a different department than mine, but in the same building. She showed up on time, worked hard, and treated everyone with respect. It was strange watching her interact with clients, seeing her use the charm and social skills she'd always weaponized for self-interest, now deployed to help struggling families navigate bureaucratic systems. One day in April, I found her crying in the break room. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my distance. "I just met with a family," she said, wiping her eyes. "The mother is working 2 jobs trying to keep her kids out of foster care, and the father left, and she's 1 paycheck away from homelessness. And I was sitting there, listening to her story, and all I could think about was how I treated you, like you were disposable, like your feelings didn't matter, when you're the one who chose to spend your life helping people like her." She looked at me. "I wasted so many years being cruel when I could have been kind."
I wasted our whole relationship competing with you when I should have been learning from you. "You can't change the past," I said carefully, "but you can choose what you do with the present." "Is that enough?" she asked. "Just choosing to be better now?" I thought about that question. Was it enough? Could someone who'd caused so much pain really change into someone who helped heal pain? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think you have to try anyway." Over the following months, Vivian and I developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but wasn't quite professional distance either. We had lunch occasionally, always at her instigation, and we talked about work and therapy, and the ways we were both learning to be different from who we'd been raised to be. She filed for divorce from Garrett in May, and though I didn't say "I told you so," I did help her find an attorney. By summer, my new life in Austin felt real, solid, like something I'd built instead of something I'd inherited. Cade and I had fallen into a rhythm that worked. He'd spend 3 weeks in New York and then 1 week in Austin, and we'd video call every day he was gone. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, which felt like its own kind of perfection. One evening in June, almost 8 months after the wedding, Cade came home early from a New York trip. I was in the garden, planting tomatoes in the beds David had built years ago, when I heard him call my name. "I'm out here," I shouted back, and he came around the house carrying a box. "I have something for you," he said, setting it down carefully. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." Inside the box were more letters, not from David this time, but from Cade. Dozens of them, dating back 5 years. "I wrote to you," he explained. "Every time I was in New York pretending to be deployed, I wrote you letters about what I was really doing, who I really was, what I was really thinking. I never sent them because I was a coward, but I kept them. I thought maybe you'd want to read them now, to understand who I was during all those times I was lying to you." I picked up the first letter, dated from early in our relationship. "Why now?" "Because you deserve the truth, all of it. Not just the version that makes me look good or protects me from consequences." I spent the next few days reading through Cade's letters, and they were revelatory. He'd written about his guilt over lying to me, his fear that I'd leave if I knew the truth, his struggle to balance his business persona with the person he became when he was with me. "I'm 2 different people," one letter read. "There's Cade Brennan, the CEO, who makes ruthless decisions and prioritizes profit, and there's the man who helps you set up donation tables at veterans events and feels like that's the most important work he could possibly do. I don't know how to reconcile those 2 versions of myself."
Another letter, written during one of his deployments, detailed his growing rage at how my family treated me. "I watched you make excuses for them again today," he wrote. "You called and told me about how your mother had criticized your career choice again, and you laughed it off like it didn't hurt. But I could hear the hurt in your voice, and I wanted to tell you right then that I had the power to make them pay for every cruel word. I didn't because I knew you'd be horrified by the impulse, but I'm building leverage anyway, piece by piece, because I know someday they'll push you too far, and I want to be ready." The final letter was dated 2 days before Vivian's wedding. "Tomorrow I'm flying to Dallas," it read. "I'm going to tell you everything, about who I am, about what I've been doing, about the power I've accumulated, and what I plan to do with it. I'm terrified you'll hate me for lying. I'm terrified you'll think I'm just like your parents, using money as a weapon. But I'm more terrified of watching them destroy you and doing nothing. So tomorrow, everything changes." I found Cade in the study when I finished reading. "You wrote me love letters about revenge," I said. He looked up, trying to read my expression. "I wrote you love letters about wanting to protect you. The revenge was just the vehicle."
"It's twisted," I said. "It's completely twisted and messed up, and probably a dozen kinds of unhealthy." I sat down next to him. "And yet, somehow, it's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me. What does that say about me?" He smiled slightly. "That you understand the difference between using power to hurt people and using power to defend someone you love? Or that I'm just as messed up as you are," I countered. "Maybe we're perfect for each other because we're both broken in compatible ways." "Maybe," he agreed. Then, more seriously, "Are we okay knowing everything now, knowing all the ways I've manipulated situations and hidden things from you?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. Was I okay with having married someone who'd lied about his identity for years? With the fact that my vindication had come through his ruthless business practices? With the reality that my new life was built on a foundation of secrets and leveraged power? "I don't know if okay is the right word," I said finally, "but I think we're honest now, and that's worth more than okay." I took his hand. "No more secrets, no more lies of omission or strategic withholding of information. If we're going to build a real life together, it has to be on the truth." That summer, something unexpected happened. My mother requested a meeting, not through email or a formal letter, but through Vivienne, who approached me nervously one day at work. "She wants to see you," Vivienne said. "Just her, not Dad. She says she needs to apologize properly." She had months to apologize properly, I pointed out. "Why now?" Vivienne looked uncomfortable. "Because she's sick. Cancer. They caught it early and the prognosis is good, but it scared her, made her realize she was running out of time to fix things." I didn't want to feel sympathy. I wanted to maintain my anger, my boundaries, my righteous distance. But I heard myself asking, "What kind of cancer?" "Breast, stage 2. She starts treatment next week." Vivienne hesitated. "I know you don't owe her anything. I know she doesn't deserve your forgiveness, but I think she's genuinely trying to make amends before it's too late." So I agreed to meet her, not at the Highland Park estate, but at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, neutral territory, where I could leave whenever I wanted. My mother arrived looking smaller than I remembered, wearing a simple dress instead of her usual designer suits, her hair showing gray roots she'd normally have covered immediately. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice wavered in a way I'd never heard before. "I wasn't sure you would." We sat across from each other, and she ordered tea she didn't drink, her hands wrapped around the cup like it could anchor her. "I need to tell you I'm sorry," she started, "but sorry doesn't begin to cover what I did to you, what I let happen to you." I waited, letting her struggle through it. "When I had the affair with David, I was young and stupid and unhappy in my marriage. Your father, Robert, he was already married to his business, and I felt invisible. David saw me. He made me feel intelligent and interesting and valued. She looked down. When I got pregnant, I was terrified. Robert and I were barely intimate anymore, and the timing made it obvious you weren't his. I almost left him, almost chose David and you and a different life. But Robert found out about the affair, and instead of divorcing me, he made a deal. He'd stay, raise you as his own, and I'd never contact David again. It seemed like the best option for everyone. Except me, I said quietly. Except David. You chose security over love and made everyone else pay the price. Yes, she admitted, that's exactly what I did. And then I compounded it by never defending you when Robert took out his anger on you, by telling Vivienne about your paternity and giving her ammunition to hurt you, by choosing to believe the worst about you, like that college abortion story, because it made my choices feel more justified. She finally met my eyes. I sacrificed you to maintain my lifestyle, and I can't take that back. I can't give you a childhood where you felt loved and wanted. All I can do is tell you the truth and hope that somehow, someday, you might find a way to forgive me. I sat with that for a long moment, watching this woman who'd shaped so much of my pain, who looked breakable now in a way she never had before. I don't forgive you, I said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever.
What you did, choosing comfort over your daughter, weaponizing secrets, standing by while your husband and your other daughter destroyed my self-worth, that's not something that gets erased because you're scared of dying. She nodded, tears falling. I understand. But, I continued, I don't want you to die thinking I hate you. I don't hate you. I'm angry and hurt and disappointed, but I don't hate you. And if you want to use whatever time you have left to be better, to actually work on understanding why you made the choices you made, then I'm willing to acknowledge that effort. That's more than I deserve, she whispered. It is, I agreed. But David taught me, through his letters, through the life he built, that holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. So I'm choosing to let go of the anger, not for you, but for myself. We finished our coffee in silence, and before she left, she pulled out an envelope. These are letters David wrote to me during our affair. I kept them all these years, hidden away. I thought you might want them, to understand what he was like, who he was before I destroyed everything. I took the letters home and read them that night, discovering a side of David I hadn't known. Young, passionate, full of hope that love could overcome practical obstacles. I don't care about your husband's money or his connections, he wrote in one letter. I care about you, about the life we could build together. We could be happy with very little, as long as we had each other. Reading those words, understanding how my mother had chosen wealth over love, helped me understand her in a new way. Not forgive her, understanding and forgiveness weren't the same thing, but see her as a person who'd made a terrible choice and spent decades trying to justify it. My mother went through treatment that fall, and I visited her twice in the hospital, brief visits where we talked carefully about neutral subjects. Vivienne was there more often, stepping into a caretaker role that surprised everyone. She's trying, Vivienne told me after one visit, actually trying to be better. It's weird seeing her vulnerable. By October, exactly 1 year after the wedding, my mother was in remission, and my father had finally accepted his diminished role in Montgomery Holdings. Cade had restructured the company into something profitable and ethical, keeping the Montgomery name but removing the family's control. It was poetic justice in its way. They still had wealth, just not power. Vivienne had finalized her divorce and was excelling at the nonprofit, bringing in more donations in 6 months than we'd raised in the previous 2 years. She'd cut her hair short, started dressing in a way that felt authentic rather than performative, and developed genuine friendships with colleagues who knew nothing about her family or her past. I actually like who I'm becoming,
she told me one day. Is that strange, to like yourself for the first time at 29? I think it's brave, I said honestly. Most people never get there. That November, Cade and I hosted our first Thanksgiving in David's house. We invited Vivian and my mother, who came bearing humble dishes instead of the catered spreads she used to insist on. We invited colleagues from my nonprofit and friends Cade had made in the Austin business community. We invited people who'd shown up for us, who'd chosen kindness over judgment, who understood that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. My father wasn't there. I'd extended an invitation through Vivian, but he'd declined, still too proud to accept his diminished status in my life. He says he's sorry, Vivian had relayed, but he doesn't know how to be around you without feeling ashamed. That's his work to do, I'd said. I can't fix his guilt for him. So we gathered around David's old dining table, me and Cade, Vivian and my mother, a dozen other people who'd become important to me in this new life, and I felt something I'd never felt at a Montgomery family function: genuine gratitude. I want to say something, I announced when everyone had food on their plates. A year ago, I was sitting in the rain at my sister's wedding, covered in wine, feeling worthless. I thought that was rock bottom, but it wasn't rock bottom. It was bedrock. It was the solid foundation I needed to finally build something real. I looked around the table. Some of you have known me for years. Some of you only met me recently. Some of you caused me pain and are working to be better. But all of you are here because you chose to be, not because of obligation or guilt or maintaining appearances. That's the family I choose. That's the life I want. Cade squeezed my hand under the table. Vivian was crying openly. My mother nodded, acknowledging the truth of what I'd said. And I felt something settle in my chest. Not quite forgiveness for everyone, not quite closure on all the pain, but something close enough to peace. Over the next months, I worked on my relationship with my mother, slowly, carefully, building something new from the ruins of what had never really existed. She'd tell me stories about David, about their affair and what he'd been like, and I'd add those pieces to the puzzle of who my biological father had been. We'd never be close the way mothers and daughters were supposed to be close, but we were honest, and that was worth something. Vivian and I grew closer too, developing the sibling relationship we should have had from the very start.